What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. And this is a bit of a reaction, but with a twist. So a lot of you guys would have seen the individual that's on the thumbnail, Mark Quiroz, Tortuga from Colton. And he did an interview recently on a podcast. I'll link to it in the description, where it's like 32 years in solitary confinement. And he's in the general population now, right? Centinela, B-Yard, I think. But he's hanging out, he's doing his thing. We were together. He's been validated for decades and decades and decades, right? And we were together in the Pelican Bay SHU. We were neighbors for a few years. And so I didn't recognize him at first, even though the thumbnail of that video is just him sitting there, right? Man, he looks different. And then I watched, I listened. I had something else planned for Mental Health Monday today, which is a series that I do obviously every Monday. But then I thought this is also a mental health video of sorts, right? So it's a little bit of a twist. The transformation of this guy is almost, it's palpable, right? Like it you could almost grab it. There's that much substance to it, if you will. And in his interview, he kind of gives a little bit of the roadmap. He gives a little insight into how that has been possible and what he sees for the future. So I'm not going to play clips of it or anything. I strongly suggest you guys go watch it if you haven't. It's got like 150,000 views or something. It's popping pretty good for a video. It's a trip, right, to see individuals like this doing interviews. But it's powerful. I love it personally. I think it's amazing. I'm glad that he did it. So one of the things he talks about in the SHU, and which I can relate to from my time around him, is how anger kept him going. That like, I'm not going to be broken by this system. And this dude went through hell in the SHU. The SHU is hell for all of us, right? If I'm going to keep it real. But he went through some things that a lot of people did. Mail, he was writing a couple different ladies. They would switch the letters with the envelopes and send them out to the wrong ones on purpose, right? To smut them up, essentially. Just all kinds of things. They called it gang activity because he had one of his loved ones send Alfie Sosa a dictionary, right? Just a dictionary, from the streets, from the manufacturer, like publisher. Just a lot. They harassed him a lot because he was hitting them. He was hitting them with legal work, and he wouldn't break. So, and he still hasn't broken, right? He's grown, he's changed, but he hasn't broken. So that's what I want to get into. You might remember a long time ago, I did a video about how when we were in the SHU, there was a northerner that was there also who was validated. They had used a Huelga bird tattoo against him. And Tortuga also had a tattoo of a Huelga bird that looked the same. And so we're going to kind of work together to help fight his validation, right? To fight the Northerners' validation. That video's on my playlist. You can go back and check it out. Like the law one, talking law or whatever. But I think I had mentioned on here before that he was angry. He had a chip on his shoulder. And if you look at the picture, the other picture on the thumbnail, the old one, right? That has his name and CDC number. Which is from one of those law enforcement things years ago when they would, do the big boards and put everybody's name. So it's an old picture, but I would argue he looks younger now. He looks healthier now, right? And he definitely looks more at peace. So anger helps us survive sometimes. It's not necessarily a bad thing. And survival can be rough, but it beats the alternative. It's better than not surviving. And if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. But it's hard on our bodies, right? It's hard on our mental health. It's hard on our physical health. And we can only keep it up for so long. And it's a wall, right? People are driven by anger. And I think a lot of this translates beyond prison walls and prison gang validations and all that. I think there's some things in here for people that have never done a day at a time. And regardless of where you're from. Anger is a motivator, right? Anger will keep you going. Anger will keep you pushing. But again, it's a wall. It's a protecting, keeping everybody at arm's distance, not allowing any threats in, being closed off. You know, you're surviving by being tightly wound up like, fool, I won't be broken, you know? And again, I salute to those who have been able to endure because of anger, right? I don't want to criticize that. But now you hear him, he's still surviving. He's still not broken. But he's thriving, right? It's survival is one step above death. You know, it's not the height of success. That's not survival. Survival is, you ain't got me yet, right? I'm hanging on by a thread. Thriving is I have something to look forward to. I'm moving towards something. I'm not just trying to protect myself from what's around me. I'm seeking something. There's hope. You know, Father Boyle, I use this phrase a lot. I got it from him, from Homeboy Industries. A lethal absence of hope. That's what drives a lot of us, you know, to do crazy shit. Like, man, I don't care. That whole I don't give a fuck attitude, it's whatever. And it really is, you know, because all that matters is now. All that matters is this moment. Hope, though, is more powerful than anger. Like, hope will take you places, you know, and this dude's still incarcerated. He's still in prison, but he's going places. And you hear that and you can see it physically on him. The smile, the ease, like just, you know, I would see the dude walk to the yard and walk back. And even in these limited interactions, because you're not walking around a whole lot of different places in the SHU. But when you do, you're mostly in front of the same 8 cells. And so we said, like I said, it was, you know, it was a handful of years, right? I don't want to overstate. We weren't like friends or homeboys or anything, but it was cordial. We were neighbors, right? In a very confined space. And he looks better. He looks happier. He looks healthier. There's a lightness to him, you know? And so that's sort of the first thing that struck me and that I was reminded of throughout the video. Sometimes you got to be angry to make it. But you're not going to make it staying angry. You know, there's something next. Like you protect yourself, but when you don't need to protect yourself anymore, sometimes we don't realize that. We stay twisted up, right? When the threat is gone, when circumstances change, we get so used to anger and so comfortable with anger that we don't know how to not be angry. And he has learned that. And I'm sure that it was a process, and I'm going to get to that in a second. But another thing that stuck out to me is value, right? We all find value in service. Whether we think of it that way or we put it that way, there's value in being wanted, in being useful to somebody, in accomplishing something, right? That feels good, that motivates us. And sometimes that's very unhealthy stuff. And he talks about when he was younger, getting mixed up in the neighborhood and drinking and violence. And you know, I was there for my people, and he goes to prison and he's there for his people. But being there for your people in that world looks a little different, right? That there's a lot of risk involved in that. There's a lot of sacrifice. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of harm. But you're useful. You're of value. You're important to somebody, you know? He's found ways to be valuable and important and of service to folks now in other ways. He talks about hosting the food sales and fundraisers and cancer walks and raising money for different charities, you know, in communities outside the prison and schooling young folks. And it's amazing. You know, it's amazing. He is still a leader, right, of men, but his value to them looks different. And I would argue is healthier, you know, both for him and for those who he's around and for his community. He talks about programs, you know, and how he went to these self-help programs, and getting out of the SHU, it was difficult. You know, you've been in solitary confinement for 30 plus years. Now that you're on the yard, people are moving around. You're interacting with different calibers of inmates, shall we say. And that's a lot. You know, it was a lot for me to come home from the SHU and go to the streets. I think it would be a lot to go from the SHU to the yard, though, as well. And in some ways, maybe even a little more challenging. So he talks about these classes that he's took and these programs. And while he was taking these classes and these programs, he got to know other guys on the yard, guys from other races, guys from other areas, guys that there otherwise isn't the opportunity to just sit down and shoot the shit, but in these spaces, you learn. And what do you learn? You learn that the guy next to you's story is probably not very much different than yours. He may look very different. He may talk very different. But his life, when you really get down to the brass tacks of things, it ain't that different, Humps. It ain't that different. We're young. We grow up in trauma. We respond to that trauma. Some of that stuff's illegal, and we wind up coming to the joint. And then when you get to the joint, you do what you got to do in the joint to survive, and that can lead you to the SHU program, right? So that is a lot of people's stories, hundreds and hundreds, thousands and thousands of people's stories. And they tripped out when I heard them talking about these groups, and I'm not surprised. I think there's a lot of value to them, and a lot of dudes that were lifers that have come home talk about the various programs that really help them get in touch with who they are. And it's interesting because on some level, you have all this machismo, gangster, real one, level 4 active, all these other labels that suggest you got it all figured out. I'm 10 toes down, I got it all figured out. I'm on business. You ain't got it all figured out, Holmes. None of us do. None of us do. And maybe you got this problem figured out, but there's other problems on the board, And so he took advantage of those and in doing so built relationships with people. Whereas now you have, integrated sports teams on the yard. They're playing football, they're playing basketball instead of, Raza and the brothers playing basketball against each other. There's basketball teams with black dudes and brown dudes and white dudes on them. Things are changing. And some of that is in the hostilities and all that. And the Asker settlement, that's how he got out of the SHU, of course. And we talk about the end of hostilities, and I think sometimes there's angles of that are missed, And so I'll be doing more content around solitary confinement and the adjustment out of that. But then also the broader impact, because we could laugh and look at inmates taking pictures with the warden and this and that. This dude took pictures with the warden, right? And you wouldn't probably tell him that he was out of pocket for it, right? Because he wasn't. See, that's the thing is he's not. And it's a trip because I've seen places and I know of other institutions where people will tell their folks, you're not allowed to take these programs. You're not allowed to take Criminal Gangs Anonymous. You're not allowed to do this. And it's like they're afraid, hey, if these dudes go take these classes, they might learn some stuff that helps them realize that all this shit's a scam that's meant to keep them down. And then we're going to lose out. So no, don't go get this information that might challenge this propaganda that benefits me, right? It's fear-based. I don't want you to become educated because then you may get smart enough to realize you ain't got to do this, He takes a different approach, and I respect it. I respect it wholeheartedly fool, learn how to not come back to prison. Learn how to be there for your family. Learn how to not be in prison as many years as I've been in here, right? There's, that's real, quote unquote, OG behavior. That's how leaders are supposed to be. Hey, this ain't got to be for you. This ain't got to be for anybody. I'm here, so it's for me. But you don't have to be here. And you see, though, the change, the transformation, sure, it's worded different. Or even, me, this is a Mental Health Monday video with the twist. Because a lot of people will say, I don't need mental health stuff. That's weak, right? That's weak shit. Macho. And I get it. It's not as if I never heard that stuff before. It's not as if I haven't felt that way before. It's not as if I don't still catch that same complex sometimes myself. But the truth is we're growing and we're learning and there's stuff to figure out. And there's some best practices, right? Doesn't mean that anybody has all the answers, but there's a roadmap. There's a guide map. A lot of people have tried this and we figured out that people are more successful like this than they are like that. It's up to you. but at least having the information. And I think Tortuga is an example of that. Like, that fool has learned. He learned a ton when he was in the SHU, and he talks about studying history and studying finance and studying all these different things to keep his mind sharp. But now you get out and you get a chance to sit down with somebody and sit down in a small group, which you can't do that in the Bay. We're not having small groups on the van. Hey, homie, how's your day going? I mean, we'll ask that question, but not in the same way as a fucking self-help group, right? Because we're all angry and we all got our wall and we're all wound up tight. Like, hey, fool, you trying to get in my business, But in this space, he's opened up. And you can see, like I said, it's almost tangible. You can see that. And that exposure, talk about these dudes getting out of SHU and everything else. I've said for a long time, and I'm not the first person to say it, of course, a lot of prejudice comes from lack of exposure. A lot of our choices, a lot of our narrow-mindedness comes because we don't know no better. We never had a conversation with them, whoever them are, right? When I did my Pelican Bay video, when I first mentioned Tortuga's name, along with the rest of the guys that I spent most of my time there around, I had said, look, I never been around people like this, and I had an idea of them coming in, but I had never met any. And that's not to say I went in there and became friends with a bunch of dudes that are ops, because that didn't happen. Or that I see the world that way now. But I'm just saying, you get to see the humanity in people, right? Those are human beings, and the stories aren't that different. They really aren't. What this person did versus what that person did, and how long they've been down versus how long they've been down, sure, there's a lot of differences. But at our core, people are people. And this experiment of life is what it is. And so get around, like, instead of being so filled with judgment of other people that you really don't know about. You think you know about them because somebody else tells you about them. But we already know how that goes, right? We already know that game. We've been a part of that before. Again, whether you've been in prison or not, right? We know people like that. Find opportunities to intermingle and to mix and then see how that might change. And you can see here how transformative it is. And if this can happen on a level 4 yard in the state of California, it can happen at your work site. It can happen at, your after school activities. It can happen in your household. And so there was, again, a lot of value for that. And then the talking on camera. It's this thing. People can't talk on camera. People can't talk on camera. I'll wrap it up with this. I think he did an excellent job. Excellent job. Because he talked about him. Talked about his childhood. He didn't talk about prison. He didn't talk about it. A brief reference, right, to caught an assault with a weapon, went to the SHU program, but no details, because the details don't matter, right? No, who'd you hang out with? That doesn't matter. He's a man who did some time and sat in solitary confinement for over 32 years, and now he's a man that's outside of solitary confinement, and he's learning about himself. And again, he has some hope. He has a vision for the future. He has a chance to come home. Had he not been validated, he would have been home a long time ago. Well, I don't want to say a long time ago. For many years, they weren't giving dates to anybody, whether you were validated or not. But this fool got 25 to life at 18, right? At 18 years old for a drunken murder. With all the law changes and everything else, he could have been home a long time ago, right? But these fucking labels, that CDCR treated folks differently because of these labels. And he's an example of that. But now he's out, and there's no guarantee. I hope he comes home personally. I think he's going to be, an asset to the community. And you hear what he talks about. I want to get an RV and go camping, right? And I want to help these young people. I see that over and over with guys that have done a lot of time, and they don't always want to be on camera, or they don't always want these high profile roles, but they want to help. There's value in service, to kind of bring it full circle. There is value in service. It's up to you what services you're offering, and what services you're offering is going to kind of determine who values what, right? And so keep that in mind. But also, again, just the hope part and the getting help. the building of community. We are community creatures. And so I love this interview. It's probably my favorite interview that I saw. I think he was raw and transparent and respectful of where he is. And I think it was honest. I think it was honest. And again, it's hard for me to communicate this to you on a camera, but that's why I took the old picture of him and put it up there, because that's more kind of the guy that I saw, right? Even though that was a few years after I got out of the SHU that I think that picture was taken, but more in that time frame, the 2000s, early 2000s. And the guy now, and when people talk about folks getting out the SHU and all these guys and these, just all the language, right? And the California model, which I have issues with, don't get me wrong, and I'm not going to turn this into a whole prison video, right? But when you hear the narratives, oh, look, they're cupcaking, they're doing this, doing that. This dude's a Mac rep. He's raising money. He's starting cancer walks. He's getting guys to participate in programs with the doctors and the medical staff where they're talking about heart disease and physical health, right? It's these integrated basketball games and football games is not high-powered wheelers. It's dudes sitting in self-help programs and learning to see the other person next to him as a human being in a similar situation, and then seeing, well, how does that translate out to the yard, right? So it's not all filters and declarations and documentaries and YouTube videos. It's real men going through some shit, right? And everybody's doing their time the best way that they see fit, right? So I'm not suggesting everybody is living like Tortuga is. But let's not pretend that nobody is either, because that's not fair. And I think he's a prime example of the value of mental health work and the value of finding yourself and getting some healing. And his circumstances haven't changed. He's still in prison. Right, today, he's still there. But his perspective has changed. Again, he's not so guarded. He's not keeping everybody out. He's inviting folks in, finding ways to, how do we bring more people into this conversation? And what is that conversation geared towards? Not coming back to prison, financial literacy, physical health, not having conflicts on the yard. It's not bringing more people in to see other stuff, right? Where we see other people do that. Like, let me get all my minions to, no, that's not what this is. And so my respects to him, man, to Mr. Quiroz, Mark. I hope he comes home soon, and I hope he keeps thriving, and is never again in a position where survival is the most he can hope for. Right. And I wish that for all of us, myself included, and you guys watching, whether you've been incarcerated or not. If you're in the middle of surviving, man, keep going. Keep going. Right. Don't give up. Don't elect for a permanent solution to a temporary problem. That's not the answer. But some of us, we don't have to be in survival anymore. We just choose to. We're like Linus with the crusty blanket. Right. It's molded to our hand. It walks on its own. So we're going to rock with that because that's what we have and that's what we know. Take a risk, Combs. Take a risk. What does it say? Life's a risk. I now take a risk and see what happens. So anyways, help others move in excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time because you're worth it. Help your community because they need you. I'm going to try to get a video out on Rascal Reacts. That's the companion channel to the Homie Hangout. It's not just a reaction channel. So make sure you're subscribed over there and all the other shit that everybody else on YouTube wants you to do. Check out this interview with Tortuga, man, and let me know in the comments. Like, am I putting too much on it? Am I missing something? And look at the old videos, that I done, and you'll see how I kind of describe him a little bit. Like, dude, that fool's kind of angry. He was cool, he's always cool with me, but he had a chip on his shoulder, and now look at him, right? And I'm not suggesting that he's, harmless. I'm just saying it's different, Holmes, and I'm happy. It's good to see. And there are other men like him in prison right now, and men like him that are coming home to be your neighbor. And I think that's a good thing. We need more guys like this. So help others move with excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time because you're worth it. Help your community because I need you. And I'll catch you on the next one, man.